Yeah, yeah. Yeah, brand new space, a little bit nicer. We don't have the speakers in the ceiling, so it used to be that the guys who were watching on Zoom could ask a question and you'd hear kind of like this voice of God coming out of nowhere, but I guess we're not going to experience that. There's not a lot of us, so let's go ahead and do some introductions. Just kind of should know your name, what you do. I'm Scott. I'll start. I'm Scott Welker. I'm with Miller Harrison Law. We're attorneys, so we're going to cover a couple of legal things. Our firm and my primary practice is the construction industry, working with contractors, subcontractors on all sorts of, from full subdivisions down to, a subcontractor that does drywall or whatever. We kind of do all aspects. So that's who I am. Why don't we start right here, far right corner here.
What do you want?
Just your name, what you do.
Don Goldie's Corner Canyon Construction, and primarily what I do these days is updating kitchens and bathrooms.
Okay, cool.
Gary Drexel Construction. I have framing crews and I do remodeling.
All right, nice.
Carter Custom Remodeling. I'm a framer. I frame homes.
Okay.
Corey, Magic Touch Remodeling. I've done everything, but I'm just doing window replacement for the past 8 years.
Oh, okay. I need my windows replaced. I might need to talk to you. We're in that spot. We're in a home we're like the typical consumer right now. I've been in our house. It's like 15 years old, and we're like, it'd be nice to upgrade, but our interest rate is so good. Maybe we just do the major things and like looking at, some of those kind of bigger projects to make it a little bit more livable for a while.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about contracts. You probably touch on this every couple years when you get your CEs renewed in one way or another. From an attorney's perspective, my perception is kind of skewed because I see things when they go wrong. And I've talked to some of my colleagues about this. It's from our perspective, we're like, well, everybody gets sued. Everybody has, deals go sour and they get sued and end up in court because that's all we see. But the reality is, I know when a lot of times when I teach these courses or get out in the industry a little bit more, I know that's not necessarily the case. But because of that, because we see lawsuits all day, attorneys are kind of hyper conservative about, get all the right stuff in your contracts. Because if you do have that one situation that goes wrong, having a good contract can be the difference between that costing you tens of thousands of dollars or costing you, less than $1,000 to use somebody to get it to go away. So what we're really going to focus on is the things that might seem kind of, might seem really straightforward or might seem really intuitive about contracts where you might be surprised of, here's how maybe you should be doing things a little bit differently or what you need to make sure is in the contracts you're using. So first, and actually I'm not even going to ask this exact question. Let's just kind of talk about it a little bit. What does a contract need in order to be enforceable? What do you think? What does it take to have an enforceable contract?
An agreement between two people.
Okay, so you have to have an agreement.
Yep.
Anything else to it?
It's better to have it in writing, but it doesn't have to be.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
Just the communication between the parties.
Okay. Yeah, you guys are touching on a lot of the right things. So yeah, the question I asked here, does it have to be in writing? And you're exactly right. It doesn't have to be in writing. Utah law provides, we have kind of different sections of our law. Some of them talk about, well, here's how you deal with a contract that's not in writing. So it doesn't have to be writing. It's still enforceable. There's still laws that govern contracts that aren't in writing. But it is better to be in writing.
There have to be like things that lead to that point though.
Like what do you mean?
Like bids and stuff and, like talking about the job and money and...
Yeah, perfect. Again, you're completely on the right track. Now, there's no law that says you have to go through this process first. But, and we'll get into it, but there is law, and it's just kind of what we call case law. It's not necessarily like written in our statutes, but the courts over time have kind of ruled on cases and said, well, this is really what a contract should look like. And if you look at all the rulings from the courts over time, you kind of get a picture of what you should do. And one of those things that we'll talk about is that there needs to be a meeting of the minds, and that's kind of what you're talking about. There kind of has to be like this agreement, like we both are on sort of the same page about what's going on here. But let's start here, though. You're right that it's better if it's in writing. Why do you think that is?
Just to have document of it.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever been in this situation. We see it every day.
If you have it in writing, you don't have to prove it, you know?
Right. We see this every day where you got two guys, you know, you have the builder and you have the homeowner, and they both agree that something was supposed to be done, but they can't agree exactly what was supposed to be done, right? That's like 90% of the disputes we see. You know, builder's saying, well, I wasn't supposed to do, you know, that, X, Y, or Z, but the homeowner's like, yeah, that's what I thought you were going to do, right? Putting it in writing takes care of all of that. So that's part of it. There's other things like timing, you know, like when was I supposed to start? When was it supposed to be done? We see that one a lot. Hey, you know, you told me you'd be done by the spring. And the builder's going, well, I didn't like really promise that. We kind of talked about that generally, and you have this dispute about that. Well, if you'd put it in writing and made it really clear in your contract that, you know, there's not a deadline here, or there is a deadline and it's 3 years from now or whatever, then that dispute goes away. So putting it in writing kills most of the disputes that we see. And there's some other provisions you can put in there that will really help you too, that we'll get into later. So we kind of talked about this, but here's officially how you establish a contract. There are some kind of rules of law for what it means to officially establish a contract. First one, like we said, is meeting of the minds. And I'll get into each of these a little bit in a little later. Offer and acceptance is the next one, and then consideration. So let's look at what all those means. Okay, so first, what's a meeting of the minds? Well, it means that you, first of all, at the most basic level, everybody understands that there actually was a contract. You know, it's not this, I could take an obvious example. If you're a painter and you show up and you paint somebody's living room and that's what they asked you to do, and then you look over and you say, well, that kitchen looks like it needs touch up too, and so you go paint a couple walls in the kitchen and you go back and you try to charge them for cleaning the kitchen. I mean, what are they going to say? You know, I didn't ask you to do that. And they would be right. There was no mutual understanding that you were going to do that kitchen too. There was no contract for that. So there has to be some kind of, at least a basic level, some kind of understanding of, yeah, we're entering a contract. I'm doing this as a professional service. I'm going to get paid for it. And, you know, we kind of understand what it is that I'm supposed to do. If the other person is surprised that they were entering a contract, and there probably was no contract. There has to be offer and acceptance, meaning that something of value has to be offered and has to be accepted. So, I'll use this example that I like to use sometime. It's kind of interesting to think about and kind of helps you see how contracts work. Give a couple scenarios. Let's say that you walk into, I don't know, whatever box store that you use for equipment, and what did I use here? An air compressor. Okay, so let's say you go in, air compressor, salesman says, hey, this is on sale for $500, and you say, yeah, that's a great price. And you shake hands with him and you walk away. He thinks there's a contract. Is there a contract? No, that's obvious, right? You never said, yeah, I'll take that. Now, what if, though, you change that scenario a little bit? You say, yeah, that's a great price. I'll take it. But I can't pick it up right now. I got to go get my truck. And he says, well, I'll hold it for you until you come and get it. And you say, okay, I'll come get it tomorrow. And you don't show up the next day. And he has other people asking for it, and he passes up on it. Does he have a contract with you that he could hold you to?
No. You'd sell it.
So he actually might. Now you're on the right track. There's this a piece of the contract law, of our case law, is that if you can, they call it mitigating your losses. If you can find some other way to make up for those losses, then you can't go recover against the other guy. But if there's any reason why he can't, he passed up on other people who wanted it. If something happens, COVID or something happens where all of a sudden he can't sell that product anymore, then they actually could enforce against you because you both understood what the price was, you had some solid terms, you said, yeah, I'll get it. He relied on that. He lost money because he let others pass by. That's an enforceable agreement.
Like if he said that he'll be there tomorrow and he didn't show up at that time, or like, I think after that, it's kind of like you got to get the job done, right?
Yeah, and that's where I'm saying if he still can, the day passes, technically at that point there's a breach of contract. But once there's been a breach of contract, if you can make up for those losses somehow, then you can't go recover against the other person. If you can, not just any, but if you can reasonably make up those losses. So if it's really easy for him to turn around and sell it again, yes, there's been a breach of contract, but he has no claim because he was able to make up for those losses in a reasonable, easy way. If for any reason he can't make up for those losses, then yeah, they could recover against you. Now you never see that because Home Depot would rather not go suing, their customers. They'd rather just try to find some other way to fix it. But technically, that would be an enforceable agreement.
Even though they never had any labor or material transfer between the two people?
Yes.
There was no product, there was nothing transferred.
There was an agreement though. There was an agreement that with that material.
The agreement was, I'll do this for that. I'll pay you $500. You give me the compressor. Well, he didn't give you the compressor. You didn't give him $500. So even though
Yeah.
there was an agreement, nothing transpired between the two.
Right, but the agreement included what we call consideration, meaning we knew how much money was supposed to change hands.
If there was no witnesses, the other person could just deny it.
Yep, that's why it needs to be in writing, right? And that's probably what you do in that situation. Hey, or probably how that situation would play out is the other side would say, I didn't understand that as an agreement. That's not exactly what I said. And that's when you get into that kind of he said, she said.
That's why I've just known this business is very, you gotta trust who you work with,
Yeah.
That's exactly what it comes down to.
Well, yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, and I think that all of you who, have been doing what you do for a long time, you kind of learn that there's a lot of value in knowing when to take the job and when not to, right? I mean, that's part of it. And that's where I say that the attorney's perspective is a little bit skewed because we see the deals once they've gone bad. And that's the side of it where you're making those business decisions. Our side of it is to say sometimes it's going to go bad and you didn't expect it. So get it in writing. Let's get the right things in there. Okay, and then the last one is consideration. And now we've touched on this a little bit. But a contract has to be consideration in order to be enforceable, meaning that there has to be something of value that you're agreeing to. That both sides has to be getting value out of the deal. So if you're doing something voluntarily, if you tell your neighbor, hey, I'll come help you build your shed, this weekend, and you don't show up, they can't go to court and enforce that and say you have to come help me because you weren't getting anything of value out of that, so that there's technically no contract. If you're volunteering your time, that's not a contract. But it gets a little bit more nuanced than that. There's also situations where maybe both sides believe that someone's going to get something of value, but it's not clear what that value is. So where we sometimes see people get burned is if you say, let's just kind of figure out the price as we go. We won't really nail those terms right now. I'll do the job and then I'll tell you what you owe me, or something kind of loose like that. You run the risk of that actually not being an enforceable contract. Because if things were to go sour and that was to end up in front of a judge, the judge might say, well, there's no consideration there because the value that was being exchanged was so vague that there really wasn't this critical element that we call consideration. So the example I have up here, if you go to a lumber store and you say, hey, I'll give you $1,000. I'll give you $1,000 right now. I'll come back at the end of the day and just give me like all the lumber you have available at the end of the day. That's not going to be enforceable because you don't have a solid, here's what I'm getting for that money. Yeah. You can show up and they give you, a 2x4. You can show up and they give you a truckload. If it's not solid and clear to everybody what each side is getting out of it, you're running the risk of it not being enforceable if it comes to a dispute. So the biggest caution there is really for you on your pricing. Make sure the pricing terms are clear. because if they're not, it can get you in trouble. Okay, so that's just the basics I wanted to run through first, but really the meat of that I want to get into is the actual specific provisions. Most of these are things that we recommend that you have in your contract. Some of these are just things that you're probably going to see. So if you're a sub and you're signing a master subcontractor agreement, and that general has things in there, we want you to be able to recognize kind of what that is and what that means. And sometimes you're in a situation where you're bidding on a big job and it's not really up to you. Like, if you're not going to sign the contract, the general might say, well, then I'll just move on to the next guy. So sometimes you can't negotiate the terms of the contract. You don't have a lot of leverage to do that. But it's important to know, hey, if that provision is going too far, maybe you don't want that contract. Maybe you want to go on to the next job. So let's talk about some of those. First of all, scope of work is huge. And again, this is another one where we see tons of disputes. I recommend that when you're entering a contract, that this be one of the top 3 things that you focus on. Make sure that it's clear what your scope of work is, what you're saying you're going to do, and even what you're saying you're not going to do. If there are things that you know that the homeowner or the customer or the general contractor might assume that your job includes, but it doesn't include that, then specify that. Put it in writing that it doesn't include this. We see so many issues with this. I can give you an example, and this kind of gets into a lot of different issues. But I was involved in a case 4 or 5 years ago with a builder who had entered a custom home builder, had entered into a contract with somebody to build them a home. They use the standard Utah REPC, which, by the way, if you're building homes, we recommend don't use the standard REPC. It's not particular. It's really even-handed, but it doesn't give you like a lot of protection as a builder. So they're using a standard REPC, and there was provision in there that said you're going to build according to the designs and specifications. And there was no exhibits attached for plans. There was nothing else. They could have put in an addendum that said here's kind of designs and specs. They didn't do anything like that. They just said designs and specs. And so get about 4 or 5 months into building the home, the homeowner had got the idea in his head that it was going to include a finished basement. And the builder never intended it to include a finished basement. So the homeowner shows up on the site, looks around. They're at the point where the finishings are being done, and he goes downstairs. He's like, hey, the basement's not finished. What's up with that? And asks the builder, and the builder says, well, that wasn't part of the contract. And the homeowner says, well, yeah, sure it was, because back, when we were first talking about this home, you sent me an email of some plans, and the plans indicated that the basement was finished. And the builder's like, yeah, but I also sent you other emails with other plans and that didn't show a finished basement. And when you came, to our design center and you're supposed to pick out your finishes, there was nothing in there about the basement. And so there's just this real, we're having to look through emails and texts and conversations. And it was hard to decide, were you promised a finished basement or not? The case ended up settling, but it cost the builder some money, and he had to make some concessions that he didn't want to have to make. It would have been solved if in the beginning, in that scope of work section that said, I'm going to perform the job according to the designs and specifications, if he would have said, and those are specified in Exhibit A, and then just attach some plans, or just kind of give a summary of here's what you're getting. And if he'd said anywhere in that contract no finished basement, then it would have saved him thousands of dollars and having to fight this stupid little dispute. So that's what I'm talking about. If there's those kind of pressure points that in your particular field are things that the customer might expect that isn't included as part of kind of your standard services, put that in writing. Tell them here's what you're getting and here's what you're not getting. Payment. So your payment provision, and these are kind of in order of importance. Your payment provisions are huge, and it's another place where you see disputes sometimes. Cost plus is, I don't know. I would say that, at least from what I see, that seems to be the most standard method that's used. So I'm going to have another slide on that. But you could do an hourly rate, you could do a flat rate. You can do an escalation clause with any of those, especially if you're doing like a flat rate. You might want to have an escalation clause that says, if my cost of materials go up by 10% or something like that, then your costs go up by 10% as well. So something like that. That'd be a pretty standard escalation clause. We found, a few years back, we started to find that a lot of people were going, wow, I wish I had an escalation clause somewhere in my contract because materials shot through the roof and nobody had expected it. So that's a nice provision to put in there. If you're using cost plus, then you probably don't need an escalation clause. So here's one example that I think is a good cost plus provision. Here's what we said: owner shall pay to the builder the contract price as follows. And by the way, I want to point out first, if you're using cost plus, make sure you define the plus. We were working on a situation. We had a builder a few months ago who had come to us and said, hey, I have this dispute with this owner who I'm building them a home. And we said, okay, let's look at your contract. The contract says cost plus. And we say, well, what do you mean by that? Like, what exactly are the terms of your cost plus? And he says, well, it's cost plus. And we're like, yeah, but like, what's your plus? What's your percentage that you're charging on top of that? And he was like, well, it's kind of fluid. And it can't be fluid. Like, you had to have a solid agreement of, here, homeowner or customer, like, here's the percentage that you're going to have to pay me, or else that's not going to be enforceable. So here's a pretty standard one that I use. Owner shall pay the builder the contract price as follows: the amount equal to total cost necessarily incurred to properly perform and complete the horizontal and vertical construction work required by the agreement. So that's the work cost. Notice, like, you don't have to get super detailed, but reasonably detailed. You say it's the total cost necessarily incurred to perform the project. So anything that I have to incur, if I have to go buy materials, if I have to put gas in my car, whatever, anything that I reasonably have to incur to get this job done, like, you're paying those hard costs. Plus builder's fee, which shall be calculated as the work cost. So you have the work cost up here multiplied by 10%. So they wanted 10% on this one to cover site supervision, builder overhead personnel, client experience management cost, and builder profit. We tell them up front, like, yeah, I need to make a profit off of this, and you're going to pay a percentage to get my profit. And then we threw in there, the parties agree that any work costs quoted to owner prior to substantial completion of the work are only an estimate of the total cost of the work, and the actual total cost of the work may be higher or lower, because that's a dispute, right, that you see sometimes. You talk to them generally about, here's kind of what I think the hard costs are going to be, and they come back and say, hey, that's more than you told me. So it's nice to put in writing, if I told you something, if I told you something in text or email or whatever, that was just an estimate. Like, what you're going to pay is what it actually cost me at the end of the day. Okay. Any questions about that?
Are you going to email this to us, possibly?
Yeah. We'll email you the slides.
So on that one, that reads that to cover your site supervision, your builder's overhead, personnel, all of that, is that included in the 10%, or are you charging 10% on top of that?
So this one, it was included in the 10%. And I say this is a common one that I use. That's true, but it's usually tweaked a little bit according to what you want.
So
This particular...
The reality is that you're not making 10% on that contract the way it reads.
Yeah, and that's what this particular builder wanted. We originally had it in there as a little bit lower. I think it was 7% or something. He said, bump it up to 10% and let's just throw all of that together. That's one way you can do it. You could also do it, what you're kind of noticing, and I've done this before, is we say that site supervision, builder overhead, personnel, experience management cost is 1%, and my profit is X. And there's definitely reasons to like that. He liked this because he thought it was a little bit friendlier, like when the homeowner looked at it. And this homeowner already was kind of really analyzing the contract and asking a lot of questions. So he kind of didn't want to get into that conversation of, oh, look, like, what are all these percentages? But if that's not your situation, if you think the customer's fine with it, I kind of personally like, let's have a guaranteed profit percentage. And so you could do that too, break it out, say, here's what my profit is. And then there's all these other things that you're also going to get charged. You could do it that way. Other questions? Okay. So moving on from cost, attorney's fees is another huge one, and here's the reason why. It's not just because I'm the attorney and I'm saying, hey, I want you to guarantee that I'm going to get paid. There's actually a really good reason for you to have an attorney's fees provision. What surprises some people is that under the law, there's no automatic guarantee that if you have a dispute, you go to court, you win, there's no guarantee that you're going to get your attorney's fees paid back by the other side. In fact, it's the opposite. What we have, it's called the American rule, which states that each side bears the cost of their own attorney's fees in a dispute. Unless, and your only exceptions, and it's a little bit different state by state, in Utah, the only exception is if you have a contract where you agreed that the other side will pay your attorney's fees if there's a fight, or there's some other things like bad faith, fraud, that sort of thing. Those other exceptions are really hard to meet. 99 times out of 100, the only way you're going to get your attorney's fees is if you had a contract in writing that said, I'm going to get my attorney's fees if we end up in court or end up in some kind of dispute over this. So that really changes the game with leverage. If you have somebody come back to you and they're fighting with you over your price or over what they think you did or didn't do, and you get to the point where you're like, I need to talk to an attorney about this, and the attorney's going to bill you $200 or $300 to spend an hour looking at it. If you can't recover that money that you spend on the attorney, you might say, you know what, this is a fight just not worth fighting. So you might make those decisions every year over and over, and so then you're kind of letting a lot of things go. If you do have an attorney's fees provision and you know that I'm going to talk to an attorney, but I can get that money paid back because I have a good position here, then that changes your leverage, right? It changes your calculus. Like, oh, I guess maybe it will be worth fighting on this one. So it can really change the power dynamic.
Does that apply even if you lose the case?
Yeah. Well, what do you mean?
Okay, I have that provision in my contract and I sue you. You win the case, I lose. Does that provision still prevail?
Yeah, and that's a great question because it is a double-edged sword. In Utah, there's a law that says that if you have an attorney's fees provision that says you get your attorney's fees back if you win, that automatically means that they get their attorney's fees if they win. So there are some times if you're like, hey, I'm the one I'm going to make a lot of money on this job, then maybe it makes sense not to put the attorney's fees provision in there because then you might be in the situation where you're going, I'd rather eat some attorney's fees than take the risk of them winning a claim against me and me having to pay their fees. So yeah, there is that kind of balancing act. Most of the time it's a good decision to have it in there, but I understand that sometimes it makes sense not to have it. Standard attorney's fees provision says in the event of litigation or binding arbitration, you would only put that if you have like a provision in your contract that says arbitration's an option. But if we go to court, litigation just means if you're in court. If we go to court or arbitration to enforce this agreement, the prevailing party shall be entitled to cost and reasonable attorney's fees incurred in the litigation or arbitration. You can also, this second part isn't always in there, but I think it's a good idea. If there's a breach of contract and the non-breaching party incurs legal fees or cost to enforce against the breach without litigation, then the breaching party shall pay the fees and costs. What that means is, even if we don't go to court, if I have to go hire an attorney to write you a demand letter, you're going to pay for the cost of that demand letter too. But again, if it's not in your contract, you can't require them to do that. So it's an important one. The integration clause, this one I just want you to recognize it when you see it and understand what it is. It is important, and the concept is important to understand. We have what's called an integration clause in most contracts. It's a boilerplate provision. Sometimes the heading will say something like entire contract. And this is one example. They kind of read a lot of different ways. Basically what it says is this agreement and exhibits, addenda, etc., is the entire agreement between the parties. Now the reason that matters is because what happens a lot of times when there's a dispute on a contract is the parties want to say, well, wait, what about this text message I had that said something a little bit different? Or this email between us, that we talked about just before signing the contract or just after signing the contract. Well, integration clauses are enforceable in Utah, meaning that none of that stuff is going to matter. If you have a contract, if you said, you're going to pay me $10,000 for this job, and then afterwards you had a text message between the two of you saying, hey, could you actually pay me 12? And they say, sure. That's actually not going to be enforceable because the judge is going to say, you have a contract that has an integration clause that says that the only thing enforceable is what's actually in the contract. So they're not going to look at emails, text messages, conversations between the two of you. Now the exception to that is your contract should have some kind of provision that says, but here's how you amend this contract. So if you come to an agreement after the fact, hey, we're going to actually do things a little bit different than what we signed, then follow whatever that amendment process is, which is usually just going to be sign a piece of paper that says this is amending the contract. And so then if you end up in a fight, then you can show like we actually like officially amended the contract. It wasn't just a conversation between us. Choice of forum, again, just a kind of FYI, you can say in a contract where you want to end up, if you end up in court, where you want that to take place. That's really going to matter, maybe only going to matter if you're dealing with somebody out of state. If you're doing work in Idaho, but you don't want to have to go to Idaho to fight a dispute, then sign a contract with them that says, a choice of forum provision that says, if there's a dispute on this contract, it's got to be settled in a Utah court under Utah law. And then that means that if 5 years down the road they end up deciding they didn't like the work that you did, you don't have to go up there, they have to come to you. So you have a right to put that kind of provision in your contract. Okay, indemnification. Indemnification clauses can look like a lot of different things. You guys familiar with this term? Okay, this is a huge one. This is one where we see people a lot of times kind of go, well, there's this legal language here, and I'm sure it's just kind of standard boilerplate, so you kind of gloss over it. That's actually not the case. So indemnification clauses can look a lot of different ways, and some are really strong. Some are requiring you to give up a lot. Some are requiring you to not give up much. But what indemnification basically means is if something happens at the property, I'm not going to be held responsible for that. Like, you're going to take the responsibility. If you're indemnifying me, that means that you're going to take the responsibility for damages, losses, whatever that happened at the property. So, for instance, if you're a home builder and you're building homes and the owner shows up at the property and he brings his cousin with him, to check it out at evening after all of your guys are gone from the site, and somebody, trips over something and breaks their arm. Normally, the builder could be responsible for that. I mean, there's a lot of factors, but maybe he left something out that was kind of in a dangerous spot or whatever. If he didn't have a good provision in the contract that said don't come on the site, the builder could be responsible for that. And there's tons of other, that's like one scenario. There's 1,000 risks you could think of where somebody might get injured or something might happen where somebody might say, hey, you're the one working on this, so you're the one that's responsible. So when you're doing a construction job of any sort, there's a lot of risks that are involved with that. There's a lot of potential liability out there. Indemnification helps kind of scale that back. An indemnification clause says, under certain circumstances, and we'll define what those circumstances are, I'm not going to be the one to be held responsible if somebody gets hurt or if property gets damaged and you're owed money because of it or whatever else. You're going to take on that responsibility. So you can, by contract, decide when somebody else takes that responsibility, and the courts will enforce that. The nice thing about Utah courts and our law is really friendly to a contract. There's other states like California, New York, where they will say, the courts would be more like, well, what's fair here? Yeah, I know you signed that, but that doesn't feel real fair to me, and their law lets them do that. Utah law doesn't really let you do that. You can't go too far. But for the most part, under Utah law, if it's in writing and if both sides agree to it, the courts are going to say, well, that's what you agreed to. That's what we're going to enforce. So here's one standard indemnification provision. We'll go through it a little bit. So owner, or the customer, whatever we're talking about here, the client, shall release and indemnify the builder and hold the builder harmless from and against any and all losses, damages, under legalese. When we say damages, what that usually really means is like specifically money that was lost, something that's quantifiable. Damages, claims, that means if anybody brings a claim, a lawsuit or anything, then you're gonna be the one to take the brunt of that. Injuries, causes of action, demands, obligations, costs, and expenses arising out of or relating to the use, occupancy, or possession of the property. So, owner, the way that you use or occupy or possess the property, if anybody gets injured because of that, then you're responsible for that, not me. Or actions taken on or improvements made to the property by the owner or any of the owner's family members, agents, guests, tenants of IT suppliers, contractors, representatives, etc. So let's stop right there. So far, this actually is a fairly narrow indemnification clause. You can have indemnification clauses that say basically, hey, anything that happens on the property, unless it's to my guys, that's from my own fault, my own negligence or whatever, anything that happens on the property, you're indemnifying me from. You could go that broad. If you have a savvy client, they probably won't agree to that, but a lot of them don't read this and they get through. This one is a little more narrow than that. This one's just saying, if based on the way that you use or occupy the property, something happens, you're going to indemnify me. Now, and actually I'll keep going. Owner further agrees to indemnify builder, hold him harmless against damages, losses, etc., injuries arising out of or relating to the operation, maintenance, construction, repair, or replacement of any portion of the property or common areas on the part of any homeowner association. So what we're saying here is, if you do something after the fact, I framed a home for you, put on an addition to your home, I framed it, and then afterwards they go in and they say, you know what, I don't like that wall, I'm gonna take that wall out. They don't know that it's a load-bearing wall, and they, knock it down, and something collapses and somebody gets injured. What you're saying is that was the way that you use the property, and so you're responsible for that. Now that might seem obvious, but the reality is if you don't have that indemnification provision, you're probably ultimately going to be off the hook, but it's probably going to be a fight to get there because their attorney is going to say, well, can we find something the builder did wrong so this isn't all on you? Where on the other hand, if you show that attorney on the other side, look at this indemnification clause that they signed, then it's probably going to be a pretty quick out for you. They'll say, yeah, you're right, like my client agreed to take the brunt of that, so we're not going to drag you into this fight. That's what we're hoping to do there. We can't stop people from suing, but a strong contract in general, strong indemnification provisions can, in a lot of cases, make that fight a lot more painless for you and get you out of it quicker and cost you a lot less money. So that's part of the value of a great indemnification clause. We say owner agrees to indemnify and hold the builder harmless against losses, etc., arising out of any claims caused or resulting from the alleged breach of any fiduciary duties of a homeowners association. The reason we say that is because sometimes if you're a developer and you set up the HOA, then they'll say, well, you were the board, so you breached your duties, and that led to losses on the common area, etc. So that's what that one is. Any questions or discussion about indemnification provisions? Anything more you want to know about those? I'll tell you, this is one provision that when I'm working on a contract negotiation, this is one that I'll tell my clients, don't budge on this one. I mean, maybe we'll tweak a couple small things here and there, but a lot of times the other side will come in, they'll really want to red light that, cross it out, or really narrow it, and that's one part where I say, no, we're going to hold strong on indemnification. Like, there's no point, if they're too nervous to say, yeah, I'll take the responsibility for what I did to the property afterwards, then you got to think hard if that's even a job that you want. They got to understand you're taking on a lot of risk when you're going into their home and doing something to their home, and they've got to be willing to not take some of that burden off of you. That's how I see it. Okay, warranty sections. Let me do another pop quiz on you guys. What warranty is required under the law in Utah? What warranty requirements are there for your work?
There's a 1 year and a 10 year.
Okay, anyone else? That is, I would say, what 99% of the industry believes, and it's actually not true. It's a huge surprise to most people. There's no requirement that you have any warranty. Now that said, there's what we call an implied warranty, and we'll get into that more. I'm coming back at the end of the day and then doing one more. But basically, the implied warranty is for big stuff like, can you actually live in the place? Is it actually safe? You know, based on after you do the work, is the home actually safe and livable? And that's the only warranty obligation under the law. Now it's really standard in the industry to do a 1-year warranty, right? And so a lot of guys like to do it. I mean, most think that they have to, and you don't. But if everyone else is doing it, it kind of makes sense to do it, because if they can go get a warranty from the next guy, then it's going to make you competitive. So it makes sense to give them a 1-year warranty, but you actually don't have to. If you are giving a warranty, though, then don't just say this has a 1-year warranty, because again, maybe you've been lucky enough not to be in any of these disputes, but what we see a lot of times is, what did that warranty cover? And they're calling you out for a lot of stupid things, and you're going, well, I don't know if I really cover that, but you didn't define that anywhere. And so then it's kind of hard to say no and to make that enforceable. You put up some drywall and there's some like tiny cracks in it on a new home because it settled a little bit. Is that really something that you want to have to go fix, or do you want to be able to exclude that and say, hey, every home has a little bit of settling and that might affect the drywall a little bit or whatever. So really good idea to be specific in what your warranty is and what's not going to be covered, and spend some time on that. Best thing that I like the most, the approach I like the most, is that you have like a matrix. You have like a spreadsheet that kind of says, here's sort of the things that we commonly see, and then have like X's for covered, not covered, or whatever. That's a really easy way to do it.
Have you been dealing with a lot of those homes that are up in Draper and stuff that fell off the hill?
We actually have, yeah. We actually represent that builder. So, yeah. And there's not a lot I can say, because there's still some, and I personally am not the attorney on it. Our firm is, and I've had some conversations with the guys doing it. I will say this: the press likes the stories that kind of get clicks, but it's not the whole story. Like it's not as interesting. Yeah. It's not as interesting to read the whole story, like, oh, you mean like the builder actually was really reasonable with these guys and offered them things, and that's not so interesting to read. What's more interesting is, hey, these guys are out of a home. Their house just fell off a hill. Can you believe they built there? There's a lot more to it than that. But yeah, and there's things even in those situations that we were able to do for them that made that a lot less painless than it would have been otherwise.
Crazy thing is, we just did a big addition up at a house in Draper. I don't know if you heard of this yet, but it's called the Simmons job. Their last name's Simmons, but did an addition for them. It was going on for about a year, and then we finally got the framing done. They got all the sheetrock and plumbing, electrical done, and started doing the stucco and everything really close to being finished. And the painters went in there and they were staining, and they threw their stain rags in a bucket, and it combusted. Oh man. And then it landed on a gallon of stain, and it just went down the columns like a flamethrower, and just burnt it. Oh my gosh. Did you hear about that? No, I didn't. So is it like a total loss? And did it like burn the whole place? I don't know. They got to redo the whole frame, the whole addition. Wow. The whole new part. Wow, no, I didn't hear about that one.
So I have a question. What is your structural warranty? Because I understood it was 10 years. You didn't have a choice. Is that not the case in residential?
No, it's not. So, and again, we'll really dive deep into this when I come back. But there's no obligation, there's no requirement that you give any kind of express warranty at all. Meaning that, by express warranty, I mean you don't have to put in writing, I'm going to warrant you for X amount of years. Like in Utah, we have no requirement like that. What we do have, and structural often ends up as a construction defect issue, because if you have structural problems, then those or what sometimes lead to like a major habitability issue. We do have that implied warranty that says it has to be livable, and the it's called a statute of repose, the deadline on suing for that is 6 years. So in a sense, that means that you have a 6-year warranty for major structure issues. But yeah, there's no requirement that you warranty your structure, your structural components. And in fact, a lot of the guys I work with only give like a 1 or 2 year warranty even on the structural. It's a balancing act though, because you also want the owner to say, well, you know, I want to feel like you believe in your work and you want to show that you believe in your work, right? So but at the same time, you don't want to be sitting, like finish a job and 5 years later still wondering if somebody's going to be able to come back on a warranty issue for it. So I get that it's a balancing act. But no, you don't have to. You don't have to offer 10-year structural warranty. Other thing to consider is that when you do warranty work, that can reset your statute of limitations. So what that means is every legal claim under the law has a deadline on it. You know, if you...
Where do you get the warranty? How do you get the warranty on?
You mean like the actual...
If I went and built like a deck for somebody and they're like, oh, these guys are offering me a 1-year warranty. Okay, I'll be like, okay, I'll 1-year warranty it. So what do? Just sign up a contract?
Yeah, you'd write it up just like any other contract. You could probably find, I mean, I've honestly never searched. You could probably find some online that you could purchase or some forms you could use or whatever. Of course, I'm a little bit biased about that. I would always say be careful, especially if it's not like a Utah one, then you might be using other laws that don't apply here. But yeah, I mean, we write up warranties as just like an addendum to the contract. Like, here's what your warranty looks like.
Yeah, like I make it up, like I write it,
Yeah.
give it to them, and they agree to it.
Yeah. Yeah. What you would do, this is the ideal way to do it. You have a written contract. One of the provisions says, you know, your warranty section, and that'll just say, refer to Exhibit A or whatever. And then in that exhibit, you say, you know, like, here's what your warranty is, here's how long it's for. And you might have different components. You know, this part has a warranty for a year, this has for 2 years or whatever. And that's where you'd also include your exemptions, like this is what does not fall under the warranty, so don't call me about this. The thing to be cautious about, every time you do warranty work, if you show up a year later on a job to fix something, you've just reset the statute of limitations for that work that you just did. So like I was saying, any kind of claim has a deadline on it, and the law defines, you know, if we're talking about property damage, you have X amount of years to sue for that. If we're talking about a breach of contract, you have 6 years to sue on a breach of contract. There's all these kind of deadlines under the law for lawsuits. So you did some work, and let's say you have a 6-year statute of limitations on that. 1 year passes, they call you on a warranty claim, you show up, you do that work, you just reset it to another 6 years for that new work that you just did. But you can avoid that. And if you're careful in your warranty language, you can say, and in your contract language, then there's ways to kind of contract around that, but just an issue to be aware of.
There's no law that you have to have warranty though, right?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, you don't have to include an express warranty. There are some things that are automatically warranted under the law, but it's like a very low bar. Utah's unique with that. And a lot of the other states like look at Utah and I'm like, wow, I can't believe that, you know, like how little builders have to guarantee.
Metal roofing companies or that make the metal roofing, I was just talking to this guy, they warranty their product really well, you know? Like,
Yeah.
Like if the metal fades or something, they'll just send you out all new metal.
Yeah, well, and well, yeah, right, and that's a product warranty, right, which is different than your warranty on your work. And I get that we're talking about the legal side of it, and there's a business side of it that's totally separate too. And you know, I alluded to this earlier. If everyone else has these great warranties, then you probably don't want to be like, well, I don't have to have a warranty, so I'm not going to, because that might hurt you on the business side. From the legal side, though, it's great. Force majeure. All right, we'll hurry through these. This became a big deal in COVID. You'll see these force majeure provisions that basically say, you know, if anything happens that's outside of my control, strikes, I can't get my materials, a weather event, they call them acts of God, meaning like a major weather event or something like that, then I'm not going to be expected to finish on time, or I'm not going to be responsible for the damages that result from that. It's a good provision to have in there. Nobody really paid a lot of attention to them until COVID hit. And all of a sudden COVID comes and people are like, I actually can't finish this job because I can't get the materials. And everyone was like, where does my contract say that that's okay? And the force majeure provision is what that is. If it's outside of my control, then I'm not responsible for the delays that are caused by that. But it's important to understand the parameters of this. These kinds of provisions, they're for reasonable accommodations and for like reasonable delays and that sort of thing. If you try to use it as a get out of jail free card, like I can cancel the contract because materials costed more than I thought they would, that's probably not going to be enforceable. There's this concept under the law called illusory contracts, where basically it means like if your contract really isn't a contract, like it doesn't really obligate you to do anything and you can just get out of it anytime you want, if there ends up being a dispute about that, the judge is probably going to say, you didn't really have a contract. Like you weren't really committed to having to do anything, so I'm not going to enforce any of this. So you don't want to go so far that you kind of relieve yourself of any obligations. If you have, in fact, along these lines, if you have a provision in there that says I can cancel at any time, you're running the risk of that just not even being an enforceable contract. But the other end of that is, it is a great idea to have some provisions in there that say if there's some unforeseeable things that I can't control, then I get a, delay because of that, or if that raises your cost, that's not my fault. You have to cover those costs. And this is the last one, and this might seem like a super common sense one, but we actually see legal disputes over this. Pay attention to your signature line. If you're a company, sign as the whatever you are, managing member, president of your company or whatever. If all you do is sign your own name and then write your own name under that, you've just signed personally to be responsible for the obligations of that contract. And courts will hold you to that. So it's a really simple fix. You sign your name, and then where you write your name under it, say your name and put comma, whatever your title is in your company. President of, managing member of, or whatever. And then that means that you're only binding the company to be responsible for that contract, not you personally. So that means they can't come after your personal assets if there's a dispute there. Okay, that's it. I think we're 5 minutes over, but we started 5 minutes late, so we're probably just right. We'll go ahead and officially wrap up, so people can log off and leave if you want, but I'm here if you have any other questions. So thanks, guys.